Good afternoon. My name is Ilias Siakantaris. It is my honor to present the next session, a half-hour discussion with the European Commissioner for Economy, Mr. Paolo Gentiloni, ex-Prime Minister of Italy, about the economic prospects of the European Union after a year of pandemic. Just a brief outline of our discussion. It has been a shock year for the finances of European households and member states as well. It has been a wild year in terms of borrowing and fiscal spending. It has been a year that divergence increased in the European Union and has opened scars. Yet it has been a year of breakthroughs, institutional breakthroughs in the European Union, and I'm referring to fiscal rules that have been waived and new initiatives, and I'm referring to the next generation package and the RRF. The question that we will seek to answer with the Commissioner is if those efforts are enough to close the output gaps that opened during this pandemic and increase convergence in the European Union. So I would like to start by asking Mr. Gentiloni to give us the state of play of the next generation package and the individual member state RRF programs that have already been submitted to the Commission, and a special mention for the Greek program.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Siakantaris, for your question. Let me begin saying that I fully agree with what you described. Indeed, it was a terrible year, but also a year with breakthroughs, and is now a moment of huge opportunities. Coming with the recovery and the recovery and resilience plan that finally is starting to go on. The state of play is that exactly 14 member states presented until now their national plans, and we expect the others to come, apart 2 or 3 exceptions, during this month. Still a lot of work to be done for fine-tuning these plans, but overall I think that the plans that we received are broadly coherent with the target of this next generation EU, and this also applies for Greece. Greece was second in the presentation of the plans, and I think that the Greek plan is broadly convergent with our general scope. So good news, I think, because after long preparation that is justified by the unprecedented move that was taken with this common debt for common purpose, after long preparation, now we are there, and we are ready to propose to the Council for the approval of the plans in the second half of June, so to make possible the first pre-financing to flow in July.
We have been told, and it's been reported, that the Greek plan ticks all the boxes in terms of the criteria the Commission has set for the RRF programs. Could you give us a little bit more color on this?
Well, indeed, the 4 pillars of the Greek plan are coherent with the general view of the plan, and there are also interesting proposals in this plan, including the fact that the plan contains a loan facility which should provide liquidity to the private sector for investments related to the green and digital transition. The final assessment will be in the next weeks to have the proposal for approval, as I said, in the second half of June. But our initial assessment is a positive one, and of course it will be a challenge because the Greek plan is one of the more important in term of importance of the envelope, and the fact that the Greek government decided to use both grants and loans also strengthen the importance of this financial tool. So all in all, positive assessment. For details, we will see in the next weeks.
You mentioned that the financing will start flowing at the beginning of the summer. Could you be a bit more specific on that? When and what amounts each member state should be expecting?
Well, the situation is we still lack ratification. You know that the plan, the financing of the plan with this common debt issuance is connected of the new own resources decision. This decision has been ratified by 19 countries until now, probably will be ratified by the 20th country tomorrow, and we are working with the 7 member states that have not yet ratified. The issuance in financial markets could begin at the beginning of June if we are able to have all the ratifications in May, which is possible but not sure. If we will have some ratification spilling over in June, the issuance will take place since the 1st of July. What is at stake? It is 13% of the total amount, and we know that for Greece the total amount is around 30 billions, and 13% of these figures. Of course, the sooner we will be able to go into financial markets, the better for this disbursement, because we all know that, July is a rather shorter month for issuing in financial markets. I hope to be able to complete the ratification process already in May to begin in June.
Now, before we discuss about quantity, size, adequacy, let's discuss a little bit of qualitative elements. The next generation EU package implies a large issuance of European safe assets. What is the significance of this? Is it large enough for a structural shift in financial markets, or it needs more for it to happen?
Well, as always, something more is needed, but I think we should not forget the importance of this step. This step means that, by the way, was already anticipated by the emission that we had for this SURE mechanism supporting short-time work schemes. And this emission of around 100 billion euros was an extraordinary success in financial market, with oversubscription around 15 times the offer. So the SURE mechanism, and much more, of course, the next generation EU common debt will represent a euro-denominated safe asset for a long time, um, because the repayment will take place in the next 30 years. And it is a first step in the direction of strengthening the role of the euro and also strengthening this role at international level. So not only a way for financing our plans of recovery, but also an instrument to strengthen our single currency.
So could it be like a first step that could lead to a more integrated EU spending strategy, or is it just a collection of national plans?
Oh, definitely, I think we should be much more ambitious than only collecting national plans. Already, what we are working on with national plans is coordinated because we decided together priorities, thresholds of these priorities, regulations. So it is, of course, owned by single government, but strongly coordinated at EU level. Then we will make this function. I think I am frequently asked if this will become a permanent tool or it is only a one-off instrument. And my answer is always, please let us concentrate on makes this plan and the common debt that we are issuing to finance it work very well. If it will work, it can be repeated. This is the experience of all the construction of the European project. But to be repeated, a measure that in itself is a extraordinary measure, we need to have a successful plan and we need to raise the own resources to repay this debt in the next 30 years.
You have a long experience in crisis management. What do you consider as the biggest challenges of the implementation of this package going forward? Something about ratifications that we expect to finish quickly. Are there these hurdles ahead?
Now, my impression is that the bigger challenge is the absorption of, especially for countries having very large envelope, the absorption of these resources and this common financing. At the very beginning of the process, the difficulties were connected to how to coordinate our plans to our strategic goals, because we need an added value. This is not the emergency response. The emergency response was provided by national governments thanks to European decisions on our fiscal rules, on state aid rules, or from the ECB. These were the emergency responses in the last 12 or 14 months. Now the plan is looking ahead towards the future. And at the beginning, the difficulty was to coordinate this to our strategic goals. Now this, I think, goal has been achieved. We have very good plans among those submitted, and the absorption, so the implementation, will be the real challenge for governments in the next 5 years.
Now, what about the risk of fragmentation? Some countries will be much more exposed than others in terms of debt metrics when this crisis finishes. Is there a provision to mitigate that risk the day after? Did the European Union learn its lessons from the crisis, the euro crisis of the last decade?
Well, I have to say that this tool in itself, Next Generation EU, is a tool conceived to reduce fragmentation. Um, this doesn't mean that fragmentation is now under control, because we know very well that we will have different consequences of the crisis and also different speed of the recovery. But this unprecedented decision to issue a common debt was not taken on an equal basis among member states. It is distributed to particularly transform itself in a tool of solidarity and support towards countries at stronger risk of lagging behind in the recovery. Will this be sufficient? Well, I think that convergence is a long standing challenge for the European Union. And so it will not be sufficient to, but it will manage the risk of fragmentation and of disruption of the single market for a unsustainable increase of divergence inside the single market and especially in the euro area. So I think the tool has this goal. It is not sufficient to address this target, but it's a very, very strong one to reduce this risk.
Now, let's discuss about size and adequacy of this package. Is the combination of EU and state interventions, fiscal interventions, enough to heal the scars and close the output gap of the pandemic? And how does Europe compares with the US that have announced much bigger packages and much faster than the European Union?
Well, let me say that I don't completely agree with your with this view. Um, Not because I'm not seeing that potentially what the U.S. administration has announced could, in the next period, create a difference in the strength and in the speed of support. But until now, if we look to what happened in Europe in the last 12 to 14 months, and if you look to the plans starting now, if we look to other tools, for example, the SURE mechanism that I mentioned before, we see an amount of resources in this response which is really very strong. And that was decided indeed in a very, very way. I remember that the first decision were taken in middle March of 2020, few weeks after the outbreak of the COVID-19, on fiscal rules, state aid rules, and ECB special programs. If we look to the US as the same model of EU, we know that this is not the case. We are not a federal state, and honestly, we also are not convinced of the fact that public services and welfare state in US is a model for us. We are very proud of our model, and we are very aware of the fact that we have common response but also national response. And if we mix common response and national response and different tools, we have an amount of resources totaling 4.8 trillions in Europe, in the EU, and this is what we have put on the table in some sectors with much, much stronger impact than US. Let me have only one example. on public guarantees to support companies, we provided in Europe more or less 3 times the amount of money provided in US. And for this reason, we had the lowest level of bankruptcies in 2020 since many years. So, of course, we deem very important what is now planned by US. It will have also a very good spillover for the European economy. But for the time being, the two responses are different but comparable.
So you feel that the network that the European Union has put out is enough to close the public investment gap in the Eurozone between the core and the periphery, right?
Well, saying that it is enough, it's a little bit optimistic. I think it's a good and strong move in the right direction. To make it enough, we have to continue to support our economies, and we have, because we don't need a rebound, we need a sustainable growth for the next years. And this is the real target of Next Generation EU, not only a rebound. And to do this, we have to continue the support, of course, to make it more selective in the next years, and also to intervene in our fiscal rules to have our fiscal rules more suitable to support sustainable growth.
I see. Now, I would like to ask you a question on social cohesion in the European Union. This network that you described, especially the monetary assistance, is helping the people that have the assets, that appreciate with this tool, who have stocks, who have bonds, who have financial investments. What about households that saw their income diminish during that time, and especially after this crisis? Is fiscal policy enough to cover that segment of the population that cannot be part of the rebound of financial assets?
Well, I think that this is socially and politically a big priority for the next months and maybe a couple of years, because, of course, we know that recovery will come after the vaccination campaign is gaining speed. And we know that we had unprecedented pent-up demand and also level of savings that will push and boost the economy. But this will be, of course, only part of the truth and of the reality. The other part of the reality is, first, that some sectors are still strongly affected by the crisis. I mean, not industry, not financial services, but for sure travel, tourism, hospitality, entertainment are still strongly affected. And then, because this high level of savings, which is there in the European banks, is hiding the fact that it is concentrated in middle and high income sectors of the population. In the middle and lower section, especially among younger, more precarious jobs, women employment, the scars of this crisis are very, very strong and will remain. So the fiscal policy should have very clear the necessity to continue the support, probably not in a general way as it has been, and rightly so, in the first 1 year, 1.5 years after the outbreak, but in a selective way for the sectors of our societies and of our economy that are still in great difficulties. So we should not think that this high level of savings, these pent-up demands, is equal for all. It hides a high level of inequality that we should address in the coming months.
My last question for you, Commissioner, is do you expect a new rise of the frugals in the European Union after the big crisis ends, and how it will affect?
Well, I think that I don't like so much definitions because every country has its own position and the right to express its own position. The fact is that we were able to take this decision in this unprecedented crisis, and now we are working together to implement it with all member states. Well, the machine is complicated. As I frequently say to my American counterparts, we don't have executive orders here in Brussels, so we have to build consensus on each and every step that we are doing. But if we look behind us, the steps that we have done in the last year are extremely important. When I hear the German Chancellor mentioning the fact that the European Union could have a common policy in healthcare, even through addressing the issue of the treaties, well, I seize the fact that indeed we changed a lot of things. With Next Generation EU and with the leadership of the European Union on the green transition, I think that we have very, very strong drivers, and that more reluctant countries will understand that these drivers give an advantage for all. Well, this is my hope.
I want to thank you very much. Sorry, we have a very strict timetable. Thank you very much for your time and this extremely interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.